Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a mystery that, well, it's haunted a small Iowa town and really captured the morbid imagination of the nation for over a century now, the Villisca Axe Murders.
Yeah, it's a heavy one. We've been digging into quite a stack of research and accounts, exploring the crime itself, the whole swirl of suspects, how the town reacted,
Yeah,
and even the house where it all happened.
right.
Our mission today, really, is to try and understand why. Why does this particular case just refuse to fade away? What makes it so uniquely haunting, and what questions does it, force us to wrestle with even now, over 110 years later?
And this isn't just about recounting a horrific event. It's about trying to grasp the void it left behind.
Mhm.
The sources we looked at, they paint this picture of a really warm Sunday night, June 9th, 1912, in Villisca, Iowa. A town sort of settled into peace.
Yeah, ordinary.
People had been to church. Families like the Moores had guests over two young sisters, Lena and Ina Stillinger, staying the night. It just seemed like a totally normal, quiet end to a Sunday.
But as the sources detail, sometime between midnight and dawn on June 10th, that peace was just brutally shattered. Someone entered the sleeping house at 508 East 2nd Street,
And the weapon.
and they found their weapon right there, an axe belonging to the Moore family, kept out in the woodshed.
Just staggering, the sheer scale of the tragedy. 8 lives extinguished.
8 people.
Josiah and Samora Moore, the parents, then their 4 children. Ina, Catherine, Arthur, and Paul, aged 10, down to just 5. And then the 2 Stillinger sisters, Lena and Ina, 12 and 8, all murdered as they slept.
The accounts are, they're graphic. They describe victims bludgeoned in their beds, and the sources really emphasize the ferocity of it all.
Yeah.
Blows delivered repeatedly, spattering the ceiling, the walls. This wasn't just murder. It felt like, I don't know, an act of extreme, almost performative violence, directed at everyone.
And then there are these strange, really unsettling details found at the scene that the sources point to.
Right, the odd stuff.
Like the bodies and faces being covered with bedclothes after the attack. Mirrors covered up with cloth. A bowl of bloody water just left there in the kitchen sink.
It just deepens the mystery, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It suggests maybe a perpetrator who wasn't just killing, but doing something else.
Yeah.
Some kind of ritualistic thing or deliberate actions after death. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
So when the neighbors, concerned because the house was so quiet, finally forced their way in the next afternoon.
They found what's described as just pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel.
Exactly. And the silence. Apparently the profound silence inside the house was maybe the most terrifying part.
I can only imagine the impact on Villisca. I mean, a town of just 2,500 people back then.
Mhm.
It must have been immediate, devastating.
Oh, completely. That feeling of small town safety.
Yeah.
Gone. Overnight. Neighbors who'd never locked their doors suddenly bolted them.
Yeah.
The sources describe how paranoia, suspicion just took root instantly, turning friend against friend.
And the hunt for the killer began, but as our sources show, it was kind of hampered right from the start.
Yeah, you see, the investigation faced really significant limitations just
Yeah.
because of the era. This was long before modern forensics.
Right.
There was no fingerprint analysis on that crucial axe handle, no advanced blood typing, only really crude tests.
Yeah.
Evidence that today might crack the case wide open was just inaccessible,
Uh-huh.
or maybe not even recognized as evidence. It left these huge holes.
Absolutely. And this fertile ground, limited evidence, rising panic, that's where the key suspects started to emerge. Each connection, though, felt, well, one source called it like smoke, tantalizing, but you just can't grasp it.
Exactly. Take Frank Jones. He was a powerful state senator, Josiah Moore's former business partner.
Okay.
The sources highlight they had this bitter falling out, so motive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speculation ran wild that Jones, maybe too influential to do it himself, hired someone.
Mm-hmm.
Some sources even suggest his power might have, let's say, quietly steered the investigation away from leads pointing too close to him or his circle. Hard to prove, though.
Then you have figures like William Blackie Mansfield. He pops up in some sources as maybe a hired hand, or even a serial killer linked to other axe murders.
Right, he definitely had a violent history.
Yeah.
And he vanished shortly after the murders, which, fits the profile of someone fleeing.
Yeah.
But when they eventually tracked him down, the connection to Villisca itself was pretty circumstantial. And crucially, he had an alibi. Apparently, it held up,
Okay, so another dead end, sort of.
pretty much. And then there's the figure of the traveling preacher, Reverend George Kelly. Sometimes he's also linked to the name Andrew Sawyer. In different accounts, it gets a bit confusing.
And the preacher. Yeah.
The accounts describe him as, well, mentally unstable, giving these increasingly dark, fervent sermons. And he was definitely near Villisca around the time of the murders.
And the confession.
That's what makes his story so compelling and also so confusing. He actually confessed to the crime multiple times, apparently, provided details maybe only the killer would know.
But
Then he recanted it all, claimed he was coerced, pressured.
right, and didn't the sources mention blood on his clothes? But it might have been animal blood.
Exactly, from some kind of religious ceremony or something he'd performed. So even with a confession, the physical evidence wasn't clear-cut at all. And ultimately, he was acquitted after trial.
Wow. Okay.
And finally, Henry Lee Moore. No relation to the victims, despite the name. An enigmatic traveling salesman.
And he had a history.
A very dark one. He was later convicted of killing his own family with an axe.
Oh my God, that's chilling.
It certainly paints a picture of someone capable, doesn't it? But despite huge efforts to link him, the sources we looked at say his movements just couldn't be definitively placed in Villisca on that specific night, June 9th, 1912.
So despite all these figures, the powerful rival, the suspected hitman, the confessing then recanting preacher, the literal family annihilator, the sources, they all goes back to the same frustrating place.
Yep. No conviction, no definitive proof. The case is still officially unsolved.
And that lack of a clear answer, combined with, the limitations of the investigation back then, it created what one source called a perfect storm.
It really did. The killer, whoever they were, just vanished into the Iowa dawn, leaving behind this awful void.
And that's where the true haunting of Villisca begins, isn't it? It's maybe not just about literal ghosts, although, yeah, we'll get to that.
Right.
It's about that absence of closure. Our minds, we crave resolution. Especially for something this horrific, Villisca just denies us that ending. It feels like this gaping wound in how things are supposed to be.
Yeah. The injustice of it. 8 lives, 6 of them children, just brutally taken. And no consequence. It demands an answer.
Yeah.
And never getting one is just deeply unsettling.
Psychologically, it creates this real fixation, right? Unsolved mysteries, they generate what they call cognitive dissonance, that discomfort of holding conflicting ideas like terrible crime happened and justice was never served.
Exactly. Our minds keep turning it over, trying to resolve that tension. And Villisca became this national sensation, partly because it tapped into those really primal fears.
Home invasion.
Yeah, the invasion of the home, the idea of a faceless monster, the absolute vulnerability of kids.
And when there's no solid answer, the legend just grows. The lack of a known killer lets speculation run wild, mutate, and almost inevitably, it seems, start to blend with the supernatural.
Which brings us right to the house itself, 508 East 2nd Street.
It didn't burn down, wasn't torn down, it just stood there. A silent witness.
Passed through different owners over the decades, sometimes lived in, often empty. But the story, the trauma, those unanswered questions just sort of clung to its walls.
Until the 1990s, when, as our sources recount, Darwin and Martha Lynn took on restoring it, back to its 1912 condition, and then opened it as a museum and attraction.
Right. And that's when the reports of, let's say, unexplainable things really seemed to escalate. They became a huge part of the Villisca story as we know it today.
Yeah, the accounts are remarkably consistent, aren't they?
They really are. Cold spots you can't explain. That feeling of being watched, of definitely not being alone in a room, and especially the sounds.
Ah, the sounds. Reported by visitors, investigators, footsteps in empty rooms upstairs, the distinct sound of an axe, which is just
chilling. And the sounds of children, crying, sometimes whispering.
Her sources included some specific paranormal accounts, too, like the Ghost Moms group.
Yeah, that one stood out. They were apparently alone in the house, but captured an audio recording. And on it, there seemed to be a child's voice saying, "Mommy."
Wow.
And these aren't just isolated incidents, they're recurring themes in what people report experiencing there.
We also heard from Martha Gifford, who ran tours of the house for years after the Lynns restored it. She shared her perspective on the visitors, the true crime people, the ghost hunters, curious families, the just plain morbidly curious.
And what was the common reaction?
She said, overwhelmingly, silence. People just stood there, quiet, trying to absorb the history, the sheer weight of it.
I can believe that.
Many cried. Some got visibly angry. Cold spots were apparently a really frequent complaint, didn't matter what the actual temperature was, and just genuine fear. She talked about grown men refusing point blank to go into the children's bedroom alone, people just suddenly turning and bolting from tours.
Wow.
She described the weight of what happened there as undeniably Palpable. That was her word.
Palpable, yeah.
Yeah.
Did she have her own experiences?
She did. She mentioned things like camera batteries draining instantly, other equipment malfunctioning for no reason, feeling physically touched when no one was nearby, and hearing distinctly a child's voice say, "Mama!" from upstairs,
Yeah.
when she knew for a fact she was alone in the house.
Jeez.
She summed up the feeling it left her with as simply, like, loss.
And that feeling of loss, of unresolved trauma, it really seems central to why the house, the whole story, resonates so deeply. One of our sources brought in a cultural historian, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She described Villisca as a thin place, one of those locations where the boundary between past and present feels kind of permeable, where history doesn't feel entirely past.
Oh, yeah, I like that. Thin place.
And Dr. Reed argued that the unsolved nature of the crime is absolutely crucial to this feeling. It creates this vacuum, right, that the human psyche just instinctively tries to fill, either with theories about suspects or with speculation about lingering spirits.
So the house itself.
The house, she suggested, becomes this physical manifestation of that huge unanswered question. It holds the trauma precisely because the community, society, couldn't lay it to rest through justice.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and she made a really compelling point. Every phenomenon reported there, footsteps, voices, cold spots, whatever, it all gets interpreted through the lens of that unresolved story. The mystery actively fuels the haunting reputation.
So if it had been solved.
If a killer had been caught, convicted, Villisca might just be a historical tragedy. Sad, horrific, but historical. The paranormal claims would probably be way less prevalent, but because it's unsolved, the story inside those walls feels, as she put it, present tense, immediate, like it could still happen.
We also heard from a local perspective, Reverend Thomas Avery. He's with the Villisca Presbyterian Church, the very church the Moore family attended on that last Sunday.
Oh, wow. What was his take?
He talked about how the shadow of 1912 is just long. It's deeply woven into the town's DNA. Residents cope in different ways, obviously. As a pastor, he's seen how the crime raises these profound theological questions for people. Where was God that night? How could this happen? The lack of answers, it challenges faith. It forces you to confront the reality of just profound evil in the world.
Yeah.
He described the town carrying the crime like a scar or a heavy stone. They honor the victims, they acknowledge the history, but they try to move forward.
Does he believe the house is haunted?
He spoke about his belief in God and also in evil, and his feeling that places can hold memory, hold pain. He wasn't certain about spirits being literally trapped, but he felt that an act of such profound evil could leave behind a kind of spiritual residue.
Spiritual residue.
Yeah. He called Villisca a place where darkness touched earth, and darkness leaves a mark.
That's powerful. And it all circles back, doesn't it, to that void left by the unsolved crime. Beyond just the horror, it's the total annihilation of a family. Future's just stolen.
Yeah.
That resonates on the deepest human level. It embodies our most fundamental fears, right? The violation of our safest space, the home, the randomness of violence, the absolute vulnerability of children.
And the terrifying idea that evil can walk among us unseen.
And get away with it.
Exactly. That's why Villisca isn't just some historical cold case. It feels terrifyingly relevant, even today.
So where does that leave us? We've got suspects who fit certain profiles, but the connections were ultimately circumstantial, weren't they?
Right. We have a confession that was taken back, didn't hold up in court. We have investigative limitations back then that seem almost impossible to overcome now. We've looked down the known paths, but the sources also hint at, well, deeper shadows.
Yeah, the whispers that still persist, rumors of maybe a cover-up that went higher than Frank Jones, mentions of secret societies, things like that, or just the chilling possibility that the killer was simply a transient, a complete unknown.
Passed through Villisca that one terrible night.
It was just lost to history forever, vanished.
And maybe that unknown killer is the most terrifying idea of all, isn't it? An anonymous monster. It makes the world feel inherently more dangerous.
Absolutely. If it happened in Villisca, to the Moors, seemingly out of nowhere, it feels like it could happen anywhere, to anyone.
Which brings us back to why this mystery endures and why it's almost certainly unsolvable with any real certainty today.
Yeah, the key people are gone. The critical evidence, if it ever existed in a usable form, is long gone or deteriorated. Modern tech is amazing, but it can't analyze what wasn't collected or preserved over a century ago.
So we're left, just like the sources are, with fragments, shadows, theories you can never definitively prove or disprove. It's a true locked room mystery, but the lock was sealed by time itself.
And yet, the house is still there.
Yeah, Standing. It's this physical, tangible testament to the limits of justice, maybe, to the persistence of evil's echo, and to our enduring human need to, I don't know, confront the darkness.
It's become more than just a house, hasn't it? A pilgrimage site. A kind of Rorschach test for everyone who visits, who theorizes, who tries to feel their way into that awful night.
Visiting the house isn't just seeing an old building, it's like standing on the edge of the unknowable, feeling the chill of history's deepest, most unresolved wounds.
So stand before the house like many do, listen to the silence, the whispers people report, feel the weight of the unknown.
That silence, it really is maybe the loudest sound of all there.
It's the echo of that unanswered question. The true haunting of Villisca isn't necessarily spirits, maybe. It's the ghost of certainty, the closure we can never capture, never lay to rest.
We've journeyed through the history, the horror, and that haunting echo.
Villisca may never get the answers or the justice it deserves, but it definitely has an aura, a legend, a darkness that just refuses to be forgotten.
And in its persistence, it forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths. That evil exists, that it can walk unseen, that it can strike with brutal randomness, and sometimes, terrifyingly, it gets away.
So we're left with the questions the sources leave us with, the questions that still hang heavy in the air over Villisca. Who was truly capable of such an act?
Who walked out of that house before dawn on June 10th, 1912?
If the killer was never found, where are they now? Just dust? Or something else? Did they live a long, maybe even normal life? Did justice ever find them in some other way, outside the law?
Or did the darkness just swallow them whole, leaving only this enduring, chilling mystery?
Sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster under the bed.
It's the empty space where the answer should be.
As you conjure that, remember the names. Remember the lives that were extinguished that night. Josiah, Sarah, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, Paul, Lena, and Ina. Remember the 8 souls.
Stay curious, stay compassionate, stay aware of the shadows history can leave behind.
And maybe keep the lights on.